everyone, welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show for short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today I'm going to be talking about Ben-Hur. No, not that Ben-Hur, the new Ben-Hur. This is a different take on Lew Wallace's book about the Judean prince who's forced into slavery, who returns home for revenge. So it's not really a remake per se, but it's also really hard not to compare it to the 1959 epic. I mean, how can you not, but also how can you? I mean, that movie won 11 Academy Awards. Come on. The film stars Jack Huston, Tony Kebbell, Rodrigo Santoro, Ayelet Zur, Nazanin Boniadi, Pilu Asbaik, and Morgan Freeman. I butchered so many of those names because I don't know how they're said. The film is also directed by Timur Bekmambetov, who you might know from movies like Wanted or Night Watch and Day Watch, the Russian films. The focus of this version of the story is more on two brothers from different worlds. In this case, Musala is the adopted brother in the House of Hur. So they are brotherly rivals, but they certainly have conflicting allegiances. You have one who's allegiant to Rome and the other who's allegiant to his Jewish faith. At its core, though, it still very much is a revenge story, but it is a poorly devised one, and I will explain that. Bekmambetov certainly brings his slick visual style to this film. He's definitely known for his visual style, especially with a movie like Wanted. So it looks good. The movie absolutely looks good, and it is something you can certainly buy into from the start if you're willing to give it an opportunity to do so. And when I talk about the look of this movie, you have to look at the chariot race scene. I mean, that's the highlight of the Ben-Hur story. In 1959, it was certainly the centerpiece of the film, and here again, they do the exact same thing with making the chariot race the important, crucial moment of this entire movie. Sadly, the galley scene doesn't quite equal the greatness of the chariot race scene, because I thought that there was certainly an opportunity there to have a very cool sea battle. And while it was cool, and it did have a couple of moments, including one where they put a Roman soldier on the front of a Greek ship as they ram it into a Roman ship, other than that, it is somewhat disappointing that they didn't show more of that awesome sea battle. The chariot race scene is still quite an achievement and definitely something beautiful to look at. It's also quite brutal. They definitely go into a little bit more brutality of something like that with, the chariots crashing and people being thrown from their chariots. So it's definitely a brutal scene, but it also relies heavily on CGI. I know they did a lot of practical effects with it, but that's still a lot of CGI in the scene, and with the cuts and the way it's done, it doesn't even feel like it's real time. It feels very chaotic. It feels obviously like you're right there in the thick of this chariot race, but you don't really know where you are in the race until you see the Easter egg fish that they have to signify what lap it is. Now, the writing in this movie is very weak, especially the dialogue. There are times where I was just like grinding my teeth at how simplistic and ill-conceived the dialogue was in this film, which is disappointing because John Ridley, who won an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, wrote this movie based on a script. Some of it might be the dialogue, but then again, some of it might also be the actors coming across as wooden. You have Jack Huston and Toby Kebbell as the leads. Neither of those are A-list stars, and neither of them really captured your attention in the movie. The only ones who really, I felt, did grab your attention for as limited screen time as he had was, Rodrigo Santoro, who played Jesus of Nazareth. He was really the only one who had a strong grip on you. Even Pilu Asbaik, who we might have seen in Game of Thrones, he was a mean Pontius Pilate, but he also wasn't horribly interesting to watch. Even a movie that has Morgan Freeman didn't quite live up to the expectation there. Freeman just doesn't really seem enthused by his role. He's very even-keeled. He doesn't really emote a whole lot. It's just kind of your typical Morgan Freeman fitting him into a story type of role. But I will say this, just because you have Morgan Freeman in a movie does not mean he has to narrate anything. I'm talking about how bad the dialogue in this movie is. My key gripe is the story in general, because the story is a disaster. They made some changes to better fit the concept they wanted to tell. They definitely had their own interpretation of the Ben-Hur story that they wanted to tell. But in making certain decisions to expedite the story and to accommodate what they're trying to do, the second half of the movie makes absolutely no sense. The revenge plot becomes asinine because in this version, Judah is guilty, whereas in the 1959 version, it was an accident, and so him being sent to the galleys and his mother and sister being thrown into prison, that made sense that there would be this revenge because of this just stern Roman edict, basically. In this story, though, Judah is absolutely guilty because he's harboring a zealot, and his sister is actually helping these zealots. And so when there's an attack on the Romans, he is liable for this. So he's guilty in this story. And so believing that his parent, his mom and his sister are dead is just part of the fact that he is, in fact, guilty in this story. Not to mention, they remove an entire character arc in this story that would have made Judah's return so much more significant, and that's the removal of Quintus Arrius. Even though his character is in the movie, played by James Cosmo, he doesn't have an important role. He just basically shows up and dies. Whereas in like the 1959 story, or even in the original book, he plays a significant role, which makes Judah's return very significant. Whereas when he returns just as, sort of a escaped slave, it doesn't have quite the impact, especially since, again, he is guilty. Not to mention, the character of Jesus is entirely shoehorned into the story. The original story, the importance of Jesus actually is there. I mean, whether you believe in Jesus or not, doesn't matter. His importance to the story is critical. Whereas here, he shows up kind of just as a rabble-rouser, and then later at the end, during his crucifixion, there's this change in Judah's character that isn't merited. There's no reason for that change. Having Jesus in this movie is entirely insignificant. Now I get it, they clearly wanted to tell their own story, but they also wanted to try way too hard to maintain the structure of the original story in order to accommodate their story, and it just absolutely falls flat. It falls apart. The first act of this movie is fairly decent, but then after that, it just crumbles. Ben-Hur really is a 4-act story, and the 1959 version absolutely showed that. Here they tried to cram a 4-act story into 3 acts, and the syncopation just does not work, and it makes the story confusing, chaotic, and absolutely incoherent. Overall, this movie is far more reminiscent of Gladiator than it is of Ben-Hur, which is unfortunate because obviously the story of Ben-Hur is unique and it's not the same as Gladiator. The other problem is this movie is an absolute mess, and the impact of the film, the impact of that story is completely lost in all the chaos. I went into this movie expecting the worst, and it wasn't quite as bad as I expected it to be, but it was still very weak. As a Ben-Hur story, it was an absolute train wreck. I hate to say that, but it was a train wreck, despite having very great visual effects and being somewhat leveled throughout the movie. It didn't get too crazy, but the story just basically went off the rails and never recovered. This movie gets a 5 out of 10, and this one I was kind of wavering on. So 5 out of 10 is actually probably a generous rating for this movie, but definitely it is a mediocre film that could have been so much more. Maybe if they had a little bit of patience, maybe if they had some better dialogue, or maybe just a better cast. If you've seen Ben-Hur, let me know what you think in the comments. If I've spoiled anything, then hopefully you'll either go see it or you won't. It's up to you. You're a free-thinking individual. So thanks a lot for watching Key Gripe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to keep up on all of my YouTube videos by clicking subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, thank you, and you rock. Also visit my homepage at dkessner.com where you can find out about all my various other projects, including my written works. How about that? You can also find me at my social media handles, so drop in and say hi. And again, thank you so much for all your support. Love you.